Blog Talk Radio.
In my working life, I am ignored. I'm ridiculed and tested to my limit on a daily basis. And yet, I love what I do. I'm a teacher in a pupil referral unit for young people who have been permanently excluded from mainstream schools. For 25 years, I've worked with all kinds of different young people, most of whom have challenging behaviour. And I'm here today to be a voice for them, because their real needs lying beneath the behaviour all too often go unseen, unheard, and unmet. Now, these children are easy to dislike. They challenge our authority as adults. They disobey us and disrespect us. They can make us feel out of control and sometimes scared, like we're failing, incompetent, and powerless. In short, they can make us feel like they feel, and it is unbearable. So in our schools, we prefer them to go away and be someone else's problem. But these are our most vulnerable and disadvantaged young people in our society, and they need our help and expertise the most. And yet we're failing them on a huge scale. Over the last 3 years in schools in England, we've seen a 40% increase in permanent exclusions. 40%. And in 2016, there were over 6,500 permanent exclusions. And the estimated cost of this, over the lifetime of that one group, is estimated to be over £2 billion. What we know about excluded children is that they're more likely to live in poverty, more likely to experience abuse and neglect at home. They're 7 times as likely to have a learning difficulty, special educational need. And over half of them are experiencing some form of mental health related condition. Ultimately, excluded children go on to make up over 60% of our British prison population. And they're not just other people's children. They could be yours, or they could be mine. Like the 15-year-old girl who helped to nurse her mum until she went into a hospice, who struggled to cope when her dad moved his girlfriend into the home. And then one day at school, she was walking down the corridor and another pupil made a really cruel comment about her dying mum. And she lashed out and found herself permanently excluded. Not long after that, she went into care. And I later learned that by the time she was 18, she'd become involved in prostitution. I firmly believe that with the right support, her life could have taken a very different path. Just imagine if she'd been your child. What would you have hoped for her? And what would her mum have wanted? We human beings are wonderfully diverse, but our needs are fundamentally the same. And our need for human connection is the most important. Dr. Brené Brown says, connection is why we're here. It's what gives our lives meaning and purpose. And studies have shown that the happiest people have the most positive human connections. So when connections unravel, so too does our ability to cope with everyday life. And for children with challenging behaviour, they've often become disconnected. They've lost their faith in adults and any sense of security that they had. And if they could do well at school, they'd be doing it. But there are barriers standing in the way. There are reasons. And it's never, ever simply that the child doesn't want to. But knowing there are reasons doesn't help our mainstream teachers in their incredibly difficult jobs. Challenging behaviour in our classrooms creates anxiety, causes disruption to learning, and together with workload, it's one of the main reasons teachers give for their own mental health-related absence. And ultimately, why some teachers leave the profession altogether. And this is where the ideas and approaches and expertise that staff use in pupil referral units and other alternative provision could be so useful if it was extended and utilised in mainstream schools. What my colleagues and I know is that without a significant relationship, we can't achieve a single thing. These children won't like us and respect us and do as we say simply because we're adults and teachers. Adults have often let them down, so we have to prove ourselves worthy of their trust. We have to earn it. Now, fortunately for society as a whole, most children follow rules. But it's been shown time and again that children with challenging behaviour follow people first and rules second. Put simply, if they like us, they'll feel safe. And if they feel safe, they'll relax. And if they relax, they're more likely to comply and to learn. I've asked countless pupils, young people, what do you think makes a good teacher? And their responses are typically the same. They say things like, the ones who are strict, but that you can still have a laugh with. Or the ones that seem interested in getting to know you. Or ones that treat you like you're a human being. I asked one young man in my pupil referral unit this question recently, and he said, "I've never thought about that before, miss. Just give me a sec." I gave him a sec, and I waited. And eventually he said, "Right, get on to this, miss. I think that teachers, good teachers, are ones that you can have like a proper bond with. Do you know what I mean?" I told him I knew exactly what he meant. So is it possible for mainstream teachers to build connections with challenging pupils? I believe this requires a shift in thinking towards a greater sense of collective responsibility for these children. Now, many of us know that our current educational environment does nothing to encourage this. Schools are primarily rewarded on academic results. They're actually incentivised to exclude pupils. Ofsted inspections make no separate judgment about outcomes for children with special needs and those with challenging behaviour. And newly qualified teachers often report that they're unprepared for how to teach these children. But there are things that teachers can do in the meantime. The teacher and author, Paul Dix, says, it's the small stuff. It's the daily acts of care. It's the perpetual generosity of spirit and the interest you show in their daily lives that matters most. Small things that can have a huge impact. And we shouldn't underestimate the ripple effect that one positive teacher-pupil relationship can have. There is nothing more beautiful to me than hearing one pupil that I've spent some time with say quietly to another pupil that's struggling to settle, "Nah, bro, leave it out. This is sound." Collective responsibility is where it starts. But if we want pupils with challenging behaviour to learn how to behave, we have to teach them explicitly and not just expect them to get it. And this is where restorative approaches to behaviour can be so useful. Now, these are not hug-it-out alternatives at the opposite end of the bring back the birch argument. Rather, they are tried and tested approaches designed to reinforce relationships. And they explicitly teach missing skills, like how to reflect on consequences, like how to develop empathy and a conscience. And they instill in pupils the expectation that reparation needs to happen. Detentions, time out, exclusions and isolation do none of this. And we've got plenty of evidence now that shows that our current systems of punishments and sanctions are ineffective with challenging pupils. The head teacher and author, Jarlath O'Brien, says of fixed-term exclusions that they are inaction masquerading as action. They make us feel like we're doing something when we're doing nothing of the sort. It is respite. It is not improvement. So we need a new way forward if we're going to meet the needs of the most vulnerable and disadvantaged pupils in our society. Because while the world is full of tragic stories that we're helpless to do anything about, we can do something about outcomes for these children. So, let's take collective responsibility and let's make connections. Let's share our expertise and integrate the best ideas. We should question and challenge an inspection system and a culture that ignores them. How can that be right? And we should never forget that children with challenging behaviour are just children, doing their best to deal with what life has handed to them without any of our adult skills. And if they could tell you what they need, they would probably say something like, "Don't be scared of me. Please don't give up on me. Make me feel I'm important and give me hope that things can and will get better. Please see past my behaviour. It's not who I really am." So I'm joining with them today in their challenging behaviour to try to get their needs met, albeit in a more socially appropriate way. And I invite you to do the same. The only difference between all of us and the children I speak on behalf of is luck, education, and opportunities like this one. Let's make a difference. Thank you.
Welcome to Raising Independent Thinkers. This show is a space for families who are homeschooling or thinking about homeschooling. We'll explore alternative teaching methods, federal and state homeschooling laws, and most importantly, this show is a platform where families can inspire one another on how to raise independent thinkers. I'm your host, Bathsheba Omane, Montessori educator, homeschooling consultant, owner of Homeschool Guide LLC, and mother of two. Let's get started. Okay, hope your week has been going well. Again, mine has been busy. I'm helping my son and daughter get our kitchen remodeled so that it's accessible for my son who has cerebral palsy. And it has been a true learning experience, I think, for all of us because of this whole pandemic, epidemic, chaos that's going on. Certain things have taken longer than normal, so we're having to wait on building supplies and cabinets and furniture and things like that. And it's really not a complaint because when I look at the entire picture, I know things are going to get done, and overall I do feel blessed. So it's just another learning experience for me in patience. Okay, so this week I thought I'd change topics. I've been talking a lot about parent-issued diplomas for homeschoolers over the past few weeks, which is a very interesting topic because many people who don't have the knowledge on homeschooling laws and practices, it's hard for some to believe that they can actually teach their children, let alone issue a diploma. So I'll be definitely coming back to that topic in hopes to bring more awareness on our rights as parents. And I'm sorry, I'm using a different, I used a different headset tonight, so I just want to make sure I can hear you all when you call in, and you can all hear me. Okay, someone said I'm good. Okay, good. Okay, so the clip that I played earlier is called "What Can We Do with Disruptive Children?" And I actually think the word disruptive sounds so negative, but the speaker of this TED Talk, her name is Debbie Bree, who's an educator and consultant who mostly deals with challenging behaviors in children within the school system in England. And I thought it was very interesting. She said one of the reasons teachers leave their professions is because of challenging behaviors and having trouble handling those behaviors. But as we know, as parents, we can't just leave our children when they're misbehaving. When they're younger, we might find someone to watch them periodically, but eventually we always get them back. And usually the behaviors still need to be addressed and dealt with. So I have a guest who's a very good friend of mine. Her name is Terry Morgan, and she will be joining us this evening. I'm going to open up her mic. So, Terry, are you there?
Hi, Beth. Yes.
Hi, Terry. How are you?
Good.
I'm good. I'm so happy that you're joining me. Thank you for doing that. So Terry's a longtime educator and mom, and she has lots of experience dealing with children with challenging behaviors. So I thought I'd define what a challenging behavior is. And I found it on Wikipedia, and it says that the challenging behavior is culturally abnormal behavior, frequency or duration that the physical safety of the person or others is placed in serious jeopardy, or behavior which is likely to seriously limit or deny access to the use of ordinary community facilities. So basically, if your child is running around and screaming in a restaurant, then that is considered a challenging behavior for most people. That's culturally abnormal. If your child is kicking and hitting you or anyone else, that's considered a challenging behavior. So, Terry, I know you've worked in different independent schools for many years, and I'm sure challenging behaviors for you is not really challenging because you know how to deal with them. But what do you consider that most people would say is a challenging behavior?
I think when we talk about challenging behaviors, it can mean different things to different people. So over the years, working in classrooms with different people and also administrators, it really goes back to the person's comfort level. I've had teachers think that crying or pouting was a challenging behavior, where my take on it is if a child is expressing their dislike or their discomfort in a way that makes the adult feel uncomfortable, then of course it's viewed as being a challenge. But misbehavior is a behavior, like all behaviors. I see misbehavior as a way of communication. You know, the child is trying to communicate something to the adult, whether it be their dislike and they cannot verbally express what that is at the time, or something else is going on and they were unable to express that, and it's just kind of a continuation of what's been happening. Maybe something in the home that hasn't been communicated to the adult, especially in the early childhood setting where I have most of my experience. It could be the last conversation with the parent. The parent took something away. You know, they didn't finish a special snack, and now they have to come in to the classroom and join the routine. But if the parent communicated to the teacher that, you know, John or Mary was upset that they didn't finish their snack, could they just finish it quickly, then that would have been resolved. So I just think that when children display what the adult deems as misbehavior, it's just another way of there's miscommunication between the two, and you have to know the child, get to know the child, and get to know the things that, you know, can set them off or the things that are off-putting to them. And I think the more you get to know that individual child, you could help them through that. Some children really don't have control over their emotions because they're immature. So when you help them out with techniques like breathing or taking a moment, then when they get upset, they can use those techniques to, behave in a way that is socially acceptable. And that's what school is all about, right? And that's what adults are here to do for children. For very young children, it is age appropriate for like a 2-year-old to stomp and throw themselves down because they're not mature enough to verbally work things out. So that's a behavior you may see with a 2-year-old, and then you can understand that, and you kind of help them through it, but by giving them a chance to kind of grow a little more, grow out of it. But if you see a 6-year-old doing that, then either they haven't learned or the adult hasn't, helped them along by giving them techniques, or something else is going on, because then that's not a behavior that we would expect from a 6-year-old. So again,
it looks different for each development, and I agree with you. It looks different for challenging behaviors. Looks different from one person to another, and I think that there's always a reason for every behavior. And as parents, it's important to try to understand why your child is acting out and why they're behaving this way. And I think when we can clearly see all the possible reasons why the child is acting a certain way, then we can support them making better decisions. So yeah, like you said, for younger children who are still learning and understanding what's right and wrong, they're still very self-absorbed, which is normal. And they look up to adults as models, and young children imitate everything they see. So when we want to be mindful, of our own behaviors and how we handle certain situations, because the child is always watching, even when when we think that they're not. Yeah. So I want to get your advice on this. I saw a video the other day that I thought was a little disturbing. It was this family with a young child in a department store, and it just popped up on my feed. And they were in the toy section, and this little boy takes a doll baby off the shelf and starts beating it up in the store, just punching it and kicking it. And I would hear the parents in the background who was obviously they were recording this and just laughing and saying things like, oh, look at him. Where does he get this from? And just giggling and laughing. And it wasn't until the little boy started throwing the baby down and jumping on top of it that they told him to stop. And even when they told him to stop, he kept going. And then the video ended. But my question is, how long should you wait to stop a certain behavior? And, some parents may even ask, like, why didn't my child stop when I told them to stop? But what do you think? Like, how long do you think you should wait to stop certain behavior that you see a child doing?
My take on a child that is in full-blown tantrum is the worst thing that you can do is give that attention when the child is having a tantrum, because it just escalates the situation. So, for example, if a child throws themselves down and they're yelling and kicking and screaming, by the adult saying stop, 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 it doesn't necessarily stop it. It just adds to what's happening. So in the moment when you see that the child is kind of like calming down or stopping, then you can take little breaks, and you can say to the child in that moment, I see that you are trying to stop, or you're doing a good job at trying to calm yourself down, and kind of give them encouragement. And, you could even remind them that if you take a deep breath, that may make you feel better. But after the behavior has subsided, then have a conversation about it. Like, when you throw yourself down, you can really hurt yourself. And I can imagine that if the child did throw them down, they probably did hurt themselves. And, most times children do, and that child may have felt like they had a sore arm or hit themselves somewhere, but you could remind them that, when you do that, you can really hurt yourself, and there are things that you can do when you are feeling upset, like take deep breaths, have a moment. It's okay to let children have their own moment. Like, you can sit here and be alone, and if you have a space in your home where you could set something up, and when I say sit alone, it doesn't have to have this kind of negative connotation like you're in trouble, so go in the corner, but you can have a corner area in your house where you may want to have one of those containers that you can turn over where it's like a timer where they can watch the sand going down, or some kind of peaceful maybe fish tanks. Children love fish tanks, some cozy area that they can like really sit and think about, what just happened, or something that they like in that area that brings them, makes them feel calm. It doesn't have to just, be a place where you're like, just go over there and sit. It should be a place that is a peaceful place, a comfortable place that makes them feel, safe. Because, again,
I think that works for tantrums. I think that definitely works for I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think that definitely works for tantrums, the communication and taking deep breaths. But what about, like, aggressive behaviors when it's now becoming unsafe, or, in this case, the child is being physically aggressive in a store. He's not really hurting anyone, but he is damaging the property of the store. But what about aggressive behaviors?
So if the parent is taping it and the child is in action, and you said, you can hear the comments and they're kind of laughing, they're actually encouraging that behavior, and it's probably not the first time that has happened. So that would be kind of like a different conversation to the parent, like, why do you find this amusing and why are you encouraging this behavior? If this sounds like a family that's not really working with the child, and I would think that if the child is doing that, he's probably been exposed to some of that, or has seen it, or has had it done to himself, and that's, another conversation. But if they are not appalled by it and they're actually videoing it and it's finding it amusing, then they're part of the problem, I would say.
Right. I thought it was strange that they waited so long, because, if a child is being physically aggressive towards anyone, anything, I would stop the behavior right away. And show the child, like, the proper way to handle their behavior, whether he was angry or whatever the case was. And it's confusing when a child is doing something they shouldn't be, and the response is met with smiling and laughing. And then later on the response changes. But for many of us, I think we underestimate our children, especially the young ones, all the time. And if our responses are not consistent, then the child slowly begins to not trust what we're saying, and they won't respect what we're telling them. So again, I think we must be mindful of how we're handling certain situations. So another, like, story that I think of is, I notice parents sometimes doing this, is think that it's cute when their child is showing attitude, or being disrespectful by the tone of their voice or using certain language. Like, I was in a restaurant one day, and I saw this little girl talking to an older boy. It may have been her older brother, and it looked like she was with her family, but she was just rolling her neck and pointing her finger in his face and basically telling him off. And the adults around them were just smiling and laughing. And obviously the boy didn't seem like he liked to be talked to that way. But, he might have gotten used to it. Who knows?
Mhm.
But if that same child was to talk to someone other than the people in their family, would that be okay? Most people would say no, of course not. But how would the child know if our responses are inconsistent?
Right.
So.
We as parents, we don't have like that special book, a special book that says, okay, this is parenting 101 and go to page 5 and this is how you talk to children and model for them.
Right.
So because
we should make that book, Terry. We should make that book. Because this is the case, unfortunately, we see all kinds of things, in public. And you just want to go there and have like a little session with the parent and just remind them that, if you allow your child to do this or you do this in front of your child, these are going to be the results. And unfortunately, we don't have control over that. Right.
So in some schools, because school doesn't do that either, right? It just depends on what school you're in, or if you are a homeschool parent, you are really in tune with what your child needs. And I think a parent who consciously makes a decision to have a homeschool environment for their children, they are really thinking about the social emotional needs of their children. They're on it. They're doing research. I have no doubt that if there is a challenging behavior going on, like in a homeschool program, that it's more than likely something else that the child is working on. Maybe there's a trauma that happened, or maybe a parent is not being, consistent, and that can be fixed. But if we're talking about children who are going to school, then it would really depend on that school program, if they're in tune with doing good modeling and really doing that modeling and giving parent education. Because I could speak specifically for independent school and in a Montessori environment, it's not just about, okay, your child is coming to school and we're teaching them. It really is a partnership. So whatever is being taught in school is also being taught to the parent. There's a lot of parent education that's going on, and there's a lot of explaining on why we have this high risk of the child. And it doesn't just mean please and thank you. It means, like respecting them where they are and why we are doing this kind of modeling and what are some of the things that they can do in the home. So it is, there's a good balance between home and school. And if we have children that are coming in with challenging behavior, it's only for a while, because it really is an environment that respects the child. And then, of course, again, the parent education piece of it, so then you start seeing shifts and changes. And that's an expectation, too. We expect that this child will eventually change, because we're making a real effort to also show the parents why that this is effective, right? So I think it just goes back to the adults who needs to be prepared. And we all know that children are learning all the time. They are never turning it off. When we adults may turn off the lights and, we think that, okay, we're not teaching them. They're learning. They're learning by observing us. They're learning when we're not around. They're sponges, like this is the time that learning takes place, regardless if we are there modeling for them or not. So it's very important that we are also aware of how we are relating to them, and also the people that we relate to in front of them, because they are really taking it all in.
Right. Yeah, I talk a lot about like traditional schools and how a lot of traditional, the traditional school system is not working. But I do have to say, in Montessori environments, a lot of the teachers and educators they really do try to understand the children. And I know every situation is different when it comes to behaviors and families. And for what you were saying, families need to be educated and they need to understand their child's development, even when they are homeschooling. So in my experience working with families and children, I've heard, many stories of families saying, my child doesn't listen to me, or how do I get my child to behave? And something I realize is every child is different. So when we think of discipline, we need to approach every child differently. I've had children who I had to speak firmly with to support them, and then I had other children that needed just a little redirection. And with my own children, whom I know you know, I would just need to say, like, I'm disappointed in something that they did, and they would just burst out in tears. Like, I did not have to speak to them firmly at all. So I think we need to handle children differently, which means the way that our parents handled us might be different from how we handle our own child, because, I'm not the same as my child.
Right.
Yeah.
Also, I think that adults need to really, like you said, look at the children as individuals. I know most recently I had a conversation with a parent that, was having some difficulties with their daughter. And their daughter's personality she is a leader already at 4 years old. She really knows what she wants to do, and she has big opinions and has has a lot of difficulty kind of, following the rules. And she would be a great candidate for giving choices. So the parents are really learning to really get what they want and also give her what she needs, and without trying to break her spirit, because that's another thing too. You can see those little leaders already, and you don't really want to break their spirit, but you want to kind of guide them that they will be accepted and their behavior will be accepted in society. They have to be able to function in a group. They have to be able to listen and follow directions. And how do you get them to do that if they're so independent already and so opinionated? And you can see the 5-year-old who will probably be owning their company in the next 20 years by how they go about doing things. So for a child like that, you would want to give them, good choices, but it doesn't matter what choice they make, you'll be okay with it. So there's a way to do that where they can be successful in their decision-making and choices in an appropriate way, and you can still get them to do what you want them, what you need them to do, but they're just making a choice. And a lot of adults have, or some adults have, difficulties giving like a 5-year-old the opportunity to make choices. And it's just a way of thinking, because, a lot of people say, well, this child is not going to run me. But are they really running you when they are learning very sophisticated skills that some 10-year-olds can't make a decision? Then when they're 10, you're not too happy with them.
I mean, some adults can't make a decision. So we have to teach them.
Right.
Go ahead.
If you have a 5-year-old that innately is doing that, then that's great. You as an adult have the responsibility to guide them and manage them and help to manage it so that it is socially appropriate. And that's all I'm saying. When adults start to do that, then children, they do encourage misbehavior, not listening, throwing tantrums. You have to really know the child in order to help them.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of people think, giving their child choices, that's not necessary. But I think if we want them to eventually become independent thinkers and make their own choices when they're older, we have to start when they're younger. So, yep, that's definitely a good point. And so I've heard people say, this is like another topic, but I've heard people say when I was a kid, I would get slapped if I did something,
Yeah.
Or I would get a whooping. That's what I heard. I would get a whooping. And many people have memories of getting spanked or beat when they were a kid. Personally, I didn't have that experience of getting beat. I was on punishment, which was never really consistent, but that was my experience. And I know, this is controversial for some people, but I think it's good to talk about.
Right.
Because we do know that from research, physical punishment can work momentarily to stop certain behaviors, but it doesn't work in a long term. And it can even make children more aggressive.
Right.
And antisocial and anxious.
Right.
And this idea that we want children to be afraid of us, I think, is an old idea and the wrong idea. Yeah. And I believe we should be more focused on teaching our children self-control and self-discipline without having to use physical punishment.
Absolutely. I laughed because I thought about my childhood and being brought up in a Caribbean home. It was very mixed. So my dad really talked me through everything, which was pretty funny. I'm laughing at it because I could just remember wanting to get a beating because the talking was worse than the beating for me. I felt so badly if I know I did something wrong, and then to hear I'm so disappointed because I didn't think that, to me, was the worst thing. For me, I didn't want to disappoint. So hearing that was, to me, just like getting a beating. I would cry just like if I had got a beating. But I do believe that, talking to make children understand and modeling, if we are consistent, I think we can not do the corporal punishment thing. Because, it's just like you want them to understand and learn that you need to have this behavior that is, socially acceptable to fit into society, and this is what we're doing. So if you're modeling that and you're having these conversations and you're consistent, then all things should be okay. But children are children, and it's developmental, and you have to allow them to go through their developmental milestones. So if you have a very young child that doesn't have it yet, it takes the patience of the adult. For example, I see many 2-year-olds, I'm witnessing this, I'm in public, getting slapped, slapped for crying out loud, or for screaming, or for throwing something, or for falling over. And I'm like, how do you know I'm 2? I'm screaming,
or
I'm grabbing,
I'm
throwing a tantrum. Right. So that's very, very appropriate for a 2-year-old. And every time I see it, I feel so badly because I'm saying, this is, you're 2, right? You're 2. Right? How do we know this? Because this is what 2-year-olds do. And they are, also they're fighting for their independence. So they just barely started walking, and there are, at that stage, they are told no a lot because they're getting into things, and the adults fail to understand that they are learning at lightning speed. And so a 2-year-old has to touch. A 2-year-old has to move. A 2-year-old was just not walking. So for them, it's like, what? My feet are moving me around and I'm doing all of this stuff. And, you know, the adults are trying to keep them safe, but they are trying to learn.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So,
yeah. And I think modeling, like a lot of people don't think about modeling, like what you were saying, modeling. A lot of people don't think about that. But in order for us to teach peace, you know, we must be peaceful. In order for us to teach a child to have self-control, we must be in control of ourselves. And, you know, being consistent, I think, also is very important for young children. Having those routines, having consistent routines throughout the day, using consistent language. But yeah, like you said, I think it's interesting because when I see it too when I go out and I see parents dealing with their young children, again, they're not, I feel like they don't understand the development. And I think once a parent understands the development, they can kind of help support their behavior a little bit more.
Right. Exactly.
And I think that acknowledging their feelings too. Like I know for younger children, they act out because they might not have the language to use, and they might feel misunderstood. Similar to teenagers, you know, teenagers feel misunderstood all the time. And because they're going through puberty, their bodies are changing, their moods and emotions are changing. So I think observing our children is important too, and that helps. Just watching how our children behave and feel before and after different experiences throughout the day. We can better understand them once we do that.
Sure.
Okay. I think also teaching a child how to wait is a good lesson on self-control. You know, I think now so many people just give their child what they want instantly instead of teaching their child how to wait. You know, I went out one day and I saw like a child was starting to cry, and the mother just gave them the iPad, you know, gave them the iPad, and I think that's happening more and more, like where children just don't know how to wait.
Well, I do agree with that, and I also know that if we're looking at the context of a child being, once again, I'm making that reference to the Montessori environment and the classroom. That's why the materials, that kind of control of the amount of time the child is working with that material based on the steps that they have to take, that's all worked in to them, kind of like building up that tolerance and patience. And again, I think for the parents, for them just to understand some techniques and some things that they could even do in the home so that children can wait, right?
Right.
Then they won't see that happening. But I think if children don't have the opportunity to do that, then we see, you know, tantrums and crying and the lack of patience. So again, it's just if parents have that information and they're able to do that, then that's great. But if the child hasn't had the opportunity to exercise, like waiting and, you know, like, and turn taking, whether it be with an adult or another child in the house, then they're just not going to do that.
Right? Yeah. Turn taking is a big one.
Right. So if they haven't had the opportunity to practice that, then they're not going to do it. So it's a learned behavior. So
what are some ways you think what are some ways that homeschooling parents can help their children at home be in control and make good decisions? I know you mentioned giving them choices, which I think is important. Yeah, giving choices is a big one.
Giving them choices and also finding out what the child really loves and likes, and making that kind of be a part of their day. I feel like when children really, when you follow the child and you really get to know them and get to know what their interests and their likes are, and you fill their environment with that, they're generally happy. I mean, if they're on schedules where they're eating on time and they're getting their naps on time, and then their environment is filled with things that they love, then generally you really don't have a problem, unless there's something, medically happening wrong, like something happening with the child. I think generally if they're eating on time and, they're napping well, they're in a peaceful home where the adults are, pretty relaxed and peaceful, then all is well.
Right. So we have a caller. Harry, we have a caller. Do you mind answering a question from a caller?
Sure.
Or helping me out? Okay. I think I might know who this is. Hold on. Let's see. Okay, 980-613.
Can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you. Yes, Akeem.
Okay. Hey, what's going on?
How are you, Akeem?
Good. I had a question. Hi, Terry. How are you?
I'm fine.
Good. All right. I want to rewind it back a little bit to this is when a child is active. Right? Some of the behaviors you guys do typical.
I can hardly.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's
How's
a little
that?
better. Yeah,
this is a little better.
Right. That's better. Yeah.
So, how you have a child, he's acting out, typical 2-year-old. But I have witnessed personally children trying to hit their parents, or even using vulgar words towards their parents, like the B word. Like I saw a kid just constantly calling his dad the B. He's a B. Now, I heard both of y'all's stance on corporal punishment. At me growing up, I got beaten. I got spankings. That was the norm.
Right.
So, I don't know I can't say personally, and I have 3 boys that I raised, and I followed the methods of my dad. With them. And none of my boys have displayed aggressive behavior at all. They say, when they're talking about studies, who are they studying? What type of thing? There's a lot of factors that go in with these studies, and who are they studying and coming out with these results, right? So, what do you do with a child that's just out of hand? He's physically aggressive towards his parents, even verbally abusive. Of course, he learned that from somewhere, probably from them, most likely. What do you do? How do you handle that as a parent?
Okay.
Because I'm sure someone's listening, like, my kid is just out of control. And I've talked to him. I've tried to give him choices. What do you do?
So, if you have a child that's singing the VeggieTales song, do you know that cartoon VeggieTales? That's the Christian cartoon. That's what that
I heard of it.
You do? Do you know VeggieTales? Yeah. So,
I've heard of it.
If you have a child that is cursing, understand that 2-year-old really doesn't know the magnitude of that word. The adult does, right? That's one thing. We cannot get offended by a 2-year-old that's cursing. And I'll tell you, I have experienced that. I had a friend that had a little boy that was like that. he was taken out of the home, and he was with my friend. It was her sister's child, because there were some adults in the home that were showing aggressive behavior, cursing, and she kind of took him over. So it's like a surrogate mom kind of situation. But at the beginning, it was very rough, because there was a lot of hitting, and there was a lot of cursing, and there were a lot of behaviors, right, that you would not necessarily see with a child, much less a 2-year-old. So, number one, that 2-year-old should not receive, in my opinion, corporal punishment for cursing and kicking and having these behaviors, because this was a learned behavior for this baby. I mean, he's only, or she is only 2. So there needs to be a lot of patience and understanding for this child. One thing we know about children, when the behavior that you don't want them to do not give it attention at all, like 100%. It will go away faster when you do not give it attention than when you give it attention. So corporal punishment, screaming at the child, calling attention to when they always do that thing is just going to prolong that behavior with the child.
Mm-hmm.
So
now, I just want to add to that. I want to add to that, Terry. I think if a child is being aggressive, and if a child is hitting me, I am going to stop them. Like, I'm not going to allow them to keep hitting me.
Right.
And I am going, and if they're hitting anyone else, I am going to physically stop them. But like you said, I think there's other ways that we can help change the child's behavior without physical punishment.
Well, the stopping them is necessary because you don't want them to hurt anyone, but the hitting them back is the thing that I would discourage, because that's not teaching them to stop the behavior. So, for example, let me just talk about in a school setting, Akeem, if there were a 2-year-old and a 2-year-old class biting and hitting, a hitter and a biter in a 2-year-old class, I always made sure that I had that child next to another child, but I'm right there, because I knew 100% he would try to hit or bite the child. I wanted to catch it right then and there when it was happening. So in the moment when the child is trying to do it, then that's when I stop it right away. No, no, I'm stopping it, so that the child gets in the habit of, that's the messaging he's getting. Every time I try, there's someone stopping me. Every time I try, there's someone stopping me. And 2-year-olds don't want to be redirected or stopped. As I said before, they're fighting for their autonomy. They want to do the things that they want to do. So if you have the opportunity to stop that 2-year-old from doing that behavior as much as you can in the moment, eventually you are training them not to do that behavior. And you have to be calm when you're doing it. Like, you have to go through the motions with them. If they're cursing, it's just like, no. And it's kind of like not making a big deal about it, and eventually the behavior will change. But if that child is in an environment that they're continuously hearing cursing, and they're continuously hearing these negative messages, and they're in a home that is very aggressive, that is what you're going to get. But it's not the 2-year-old's fault, because they really are not understanding that this is something terribly wrong. They're just repeating what they've heard, and they're learning. So they're picking up every single thing that we do, that we say, even if that wasn't modeled for them on purpose. They're still picking it up. It's in their environment. Whatever is in their environment, they're soaking up like a sponge.
Right. I agree with that.
Okay.
I personally never had that. I had 3 boys and I have a daughter. I've never experienced my child even wanting to hit me or be disrespectful in public or like that. I just never had that problem. But I've seen where, from 2 to, I mean, it was an 11-year-old just calling his dad to be with over and over again. His dad is and he was calm. The father was calm.
No.
But it's like that, those extreme behaviors.
And though I heard you say that, like I gave my son a beating, you did not have excessive beating going on in your house. You have some. Oh no! I mean, parents
it wasn't a regular thing. It was at times where some dangerous situation took place where it was extreme. It wasn't like, hey, you dropped the milk. It wasn't that.
Right.
It was actually I could count on one hand, tell you the truth. It wasn't that many throughout their lives that we didn't deal with that too much. Because when I said something, they did it. I didn't have any problems with. I think when you start off a pattern of behavior with a child, when you're talking to them, they know when you're serious and when you're not. They know when you're being consistent and when you're not. I have a grandson who hasn't been around me much. He's around me now. And I could tell his pattern of behaviors is based off, inconsistencies. So when I come along and he sees me, he tries to challenge me. But at some point he realizes I can't challenge this guy. There's no, I can't do what I do with them with me. And I've seen you around.
I've seen you. I've seen you around your grandson, Akeem. Oh, I'm sorry, Terry. But I was just going to say, I've seen you around your grandson, and I've seen that you're very firm with him. But you also have a balance of firmness and love, and you're also consistent with him. And I think that that's what children need. Like, there's ways that you can help change a child's behavior without having to give them a spanking or sit them in the corner somewhere. That's not necessary.
Yeah, when I look at my grandson, he reminds me of myself. He's very dominating. He has his way of thinking, and this is the way it is. So I said, this is a little me running on. So what I try with him, I understand him, so I get him to look me in the eye when we're talking. You know how children try to look away from you? And you're like, listen, we're going to talk, we're going to look at each other in the eye, we're going to get some communication through our eyes and verbally. And right there, when I do that, it freezes the baby. When he looks at me and I'm looking at him, he can relate to what I'm saying and I can relate to what he's saying. And he's 5, he's about to be 6. And then, over the couple of months that he's been around, that behavior has tapered off. But at first, it was like a battle of the wills. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming in. Do you have any other questions?
No. I got Lauren just called me, so I gotta call her back. Yeah, that was it. Thanks, Terry.
You're welcome, I see.
Okay. Yeah, I think children know who they can get away with certain things. And it's usually people who are not very consistent. Because if they don't see that consistency, then they're just going to try. So I actually went over my time, Terry.
Okay.
And I'm happy that you joined me. I was going to get a little bit into positive discipline, but I think I'm going to wait and do that another time. But I think I'm going to go ahead and end the show. Again, thank you for coming on, and hopefully you can do it again one day.
Okay. You're welcome.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Yes.
I'll talk to you later.
Okay.
Bye, Terry.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay. So I am going to go ahead and end the show on this evening. I hope someone got some good advice. Again, I'm happy that my friend Terry came on, and I'm going to go ahead and play another clip for you all, and I hope that you join me next week, same day and same time. Okay, have a blessed week.
In my working life, I am ignored. I'm ridiculed and tested to my limit on a daily basis. And yet, I love what I do. I'm a teacher in a pupil referral unit for young people who have been permanently excluded from mainstream schools. For 25 years, I've worked with all kinds of different young people, most of whom have challenging behaviour. And I'm here today to be a voice for them, because their real needs lying beneath the behaviour all too often go unseen, unheard, and unmet. Now, these children are easy to dislike. They challenge our authority as adults. They disobey us and disrespect us. They can make us feel out of control and sometimes scared, like we're failing, incompetent, and powerless. In short, they can make us feel like they feel, and it is unbearable. So in our schools, we prefer them to go away and be someone else's problem. But these are our most vulnerable and disadvantaged young people in our society, and they need our help and expertise the most. And yet we're failing them on a huge scale. Over the last 3 years, in schools in England, we've seen a 40% increase in permanent exclusions. 40%. And in 2016, there were over 6,500 permanent exclusions. And the estimated cost of this, over the lifetime of that one group, is estimated to be over £2 billion. What we know about excluded children is that they're more likely to live in poverty, more likely to experience abuse and neglect at home. They're 7 times as likely to have a learning difficulty, special educational need. And over half of them are experiencing some form of mental health related condition. Ultimately, excluded children go on to make up over 60% of our British prison population. And they're not just other people's children. They could be yours, or they could be mine. Like the 15-year-old girl who helped to nurse her mum until she went into a hospice, who struggled to cope when her dad moved his girlfriend into the home. And then one day at school, she was walking down the corridor and another pupil made a really cruel comment about her dying mum. And she lashed out and found herself permanently excluded. Not long after that, she went into care. And I later learned that by the time she was 18, she'd become involved in prostitution. I firmly believe that with the right support, her life could have taken a very different path. Just imagine if she'd been your child. What would you have hoped for her? And what would her mum have wanted? We human beings are wonderfully diverse, but our needs are fundamentally the same. And our need for human connection is the most important. Dr. Brené Brown says, connection is why we're here. It's what gives our lives meaning and purpose. And studies have shown that the happiest people have the most positive human connections. So when connections unravel, so too does our ability to cope with everyday life. And for children with challenging behaviour, they've often become disconnected. They've lost their faith in adults and any sense of security that they had. And if they could do well at school, they'd be doing it. But there are barriers standing in the way. There are reasons. And then it's never, ever simply that the child doesn't want to. But knowing there are reasons doesn't help our mainstream teachers in their incredibly difficult jobs. Challenging behaviour in our classrooms creates anxiety, causes disruption to learning, and together with workload, it's one of the main reasons teachers give for their own mental health related absence, and ultimately why some teachers leave the profession altogether. And this is where the ideas and approaches and expertise that staff use in pupil referral units and other alternative provision could be so useful if it was extended and utilised in mainstream schools. What my colleagues and I know is that without a significant relationship, we can't achieve a single thing. These children won't like us and respect us and do as we say simply because we're adults and teachers. Adults have often let them down, so we have to prove ourselves worthy of their trust. We have to earn it. Now, fortunately for society as a whole, most children follow rules. But it's been shown time and again that children with challenging behaviour follow people first and rules second. Put simply, if they like us, they'll feel safe. And if they feel safe, they'll relax. And if they relax, they're more likely to comply and to learn. I've asked countless pupils, young people, what do you think makes a good teacher? And their responses are typically the same. They say things like, the ones who are strict, but that you can still have a laugh with. Or the ones that seem interested in getting to know you. Or ones that treat you like you're a human being. I asked one young man in my pupil referral unit this question recently, and he said, I've never thought about that before, miss. Just give me a sec. I gave him a sec, and I waited. And eventually he said, right, get on to this, miss. I think that teachers, good teachers, are ones that you can have like a, like a proper bond with. Do you know what I mean? I told him I knew exactly what he meant. So is it possible for mainstream teachers to build connections with challenging pupils? I believe this requires a shift in thinking towards a greater sense of collective responsibility for these children. Now, many of us know that our current educational environment does nothing to encourage this. Schools are primarily rewarded on academic results. They're actually incentivised to exclude pupils. Ofsted inspections make no separate judgment about outcomes for children with special needs and those with challenging behaviour. And newly qualified teachers often report that they're unprepared for how to teach these children. But there are things that teachers can do in the meantime. The teacher and author, Paul Dix, says, it's the small stuff. It's the daily acts of care. It's the perpetual generosity of spirit and the interest you show in their daily lives that matters most. Small things that can have a huge impact. And we shouldn't underestimate the ripple effect that one positive teacher-pupil relationship can have. There is nothing more beautiful to me than hearing one pupil that I've spent some time with say quietly to another pupil that's struggling to settle, "Nah, bro, leave it out. This is sound." Collective responsibility is where it starts. But if we want pupils with challenging behaviour to learn how to behave, we have to teach them explicitly and not just expect them to get it. And this is where restorative approaches to behaviour can be so useful. Now, these are not hug-it-out alternatives at the opposite end of the bring back the birch argument. Rather, they are tried and tested approaches designed to reinforce relationships. And they explicitly teach missing skills, like how to reflect on consequences, like how to develop empathy and a conscience. And they instill in pupils the expectation that reparation needs to happen. Detentions, time-out, exclusions and isolation do none of this. And we've got plenty of evidence now that shows that our current systems of punishments and sanctions are ineffective with challenging pupils. The head teacher and author, Jarlath O'Brien, says of fixed-term exclusions that they are inaction masquerading as action. They make us feel like we're doing something when we're doing nothing of the sort. It is respite It is not improvement. So we need a new way forward if we're going to meet the needs of the most vulnerable and disadvantaged pupils in our society.